The door opened without a knock. Johnny Cash was sitting alone in his dressing room, no guitar in his hands, a cold cup of coffee on the table. The show was 2 hours away. Nobody came in at this hour. Everybody had learned that by now, but that night, somebody did. He was a young man, early 20s, an old beat-up acoustic guitar in his hand, a denim jacket on his back, and that look on his face, the look of a man who believes the world owes him something. Cash raised his head, didn't say a word. The young man stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and looked Cash straight in the face, direct, without fear. "I need to settle something with you." The manager standing outside the door heard those words. He took one step forward, then stopped. He waited for Cash to respond. Nothing came, because Cash was listening. And that was the moment everything began. Nashville, Tennessee, the fall of 1962. Johnny Cash was one of the biggest names in America that year. Ring of Fire hadn't come out yet, but his name was everywhere. He had sung for prisoners, for ordinary people. He had come up looking like he didn't want to be anyone's voice, and that's exactly why he became everybody's voice. That evening he was set to take the stage at one of Nashville's largest venues. Thousands of tickets had been sold. The crew was running around backstage. Sound technicians were going through their checklists. The stage manager was calling out updates over the radio, and the dressing room door opened without a knock. Most of the people who were there that night couldn't remember the young man's name later on. Some said one name, some said another. But what all of them remembered was the same: his entrance and Cash's face. But the most shocking part hadn't happened yet. "I need to settle something with you," the young man said again. Cash looked him over, slowly, from head to toe. "No rush at all. Sit down," Cash said. The young man didn't sit. "I've heard you," he said. "You've got records, but I can play too, and I don't think you're the best anymore." The room went quiet. The manager outside had taken half a step toward the door. He was going to say something, then he stopped. He was waiting to hear Cash's voice, waiting for some kind of reaction. Nothing came. The young man kept going. "I'm asking for a chance to play on the same stage as you. I want to see what the difference is." Cash picked up his cup, took a sip of coffee, set it slowly back down on the table, and spoke. "Play." That was all. One word. The young man froze for a moment, because he hadn't expected this. He'd expected an argument, maybe a rejection, maybe to get thrown out. But he hadn't expected Cash to be this calm. And that's exactly where everything changed. The young man took the guitar off his shoulder, sat down in a chair, set the instrument across his lap, waited a beat, then started playing. The first few seconds were technical. His fingers were fast. The notes were clean. Those hands had years of work behind them. His voice was strong, young, raw, but real. The song he played was something he'd written himself. The words were about freedom, about open roads, about not answering to anybody. Cash watched. The only movement in the room was Cash's eyes. He looked at the guitar once, at the young man's hands once, then at his face. He stared like he was frozen. Outside the door, the manager could hear the music. The kid could play. He knew that, but he hadn't walked in anyway, because he wanted to see Cash's reaction. And so far, nothing had moved on Cash's face. Nothing. No approval, no rejection, no amusement, just that heavy, still gaze. The song lasted 2 minutes. The last chord was struck. The vibration of the string faded slowly in the room. Then silence. The young man looked at Cash, waiting for an answer. Cash said nothing. 10 seconds, maybe 15. The young man started to get uncomfortable. He couldn't read the silence. Was it approval? Rejection? Was Cash mocking him? "What do you think?" he finally said. But it was still too early to know what Cash was thinking. Cash stood up, slowly, like it took him a moment to decide to move. He picked up the acoustic guitar leaning in the corner. It was an old guitar, paint worn off in places, years of use worn into the frets. He held it for a moment. Something passed across his face as he looked at it. Something you couldn't name. Then he sat down and started to play. One note, slow, deep, then another. Cash wasn't singing while he played. He was just playing. But those notes were saying something. Every note was a sentence. Every silence was a word. There was a weight underneath the melody. The weight of decades. The weight of 1,000 stages. The weight of prison yards. The weight of 3 in the morning. The young man listened. At first he wanted to react, but he couldn't. Because what Cash was playing wasn't technical, and that's exactly why it couldn't be stopped. Every note was right. Not because it was correct, because it was real.
Something changed in the room. The young man felt it. He couldn't describe how he felt it, but he felt it. Wait, don't miss this part. Cash kept playing. The melody didn't change. It wasn't complicated. Maybe 5, 6 chords. Technically something an ordinary man could learn. But in those hands, those fingers, there was nothing ordinary. The young man looked at his own guitar, looked at Cash, looked at his own hands, and noticed something. Cash wasn't speaking while he played. He didn't need to. The notes were speaking, each one a sentence, each pause a word. Underneath the melody was a weight, the weight of decades, the weight of 1,000 stages, the weight of prison walls, the weight of 3 in the morning. And the young man understood. This was about technique. But it wasn't only about technique. What Cash was playing carried a history. Every note came from somewhere, from something lived through, something lost, something earned. And that history had worked itself into the notes so deeply there was no pulling it out. The young man's song had been good, but it had been empty. Good, but with nothing yet to fill it. Because the years that would fill it hadn't passed yet. Because those roads hadn't been walked yet. The moment the young man heard that difference, he wanted to defend himself. He wanted to say, I've been through things too. He wanted to say, I've felt pain too. But the words didn't come, because Cash's guitar had already said everything. Cash played the last chord, and stopped. The room was quiet. The young man wanted to say something, but he didn't know what. That, he said. The sentence didn't finish. Cash set the guitar on his knee, left his hands resting on it. How old are you? He said. 22. Cash nodded, like he'd expected that answer. When I was 22, I made my first record, he said. Everything was new. Every stage was a first. Every song was something discovered. He paused. But there are mountains between what I played back then and what I play now. I crossed those mountains. You haven't crossed them yet. The young man said nothing. That doesn't make you less, Cash said. It just tells you where you are. But I can play as well as you can, the young man said. His voice trembled slightly. He held it. Cash looked at him, long and steady. Maybe, he said, but playing well isn't enough. The young man wanted to understand that, but he couldn't right away. Not enough for what? He said. And what Cash said next was the only thing that left that room that night. Cash thought for a moment. He always did that. He'd think before he answered. He hated rushing. When you play a song, he said slowly, people hear the sound, but what they feel isn't the sound. They feel what you're carrying. If you're not carrying anything, no matter how well you play, that place stays empty. The young man said nothing. You play well, Cash said. I heard it. I watched your hands. You're fast. You're clean. Those things matter. He stopped. But you came in here today to say I'm better than you. And that, his voice didn't change. That teaches you nothing. The room was quiet. Can I ask you something? The young man said. Cash waited. Have you ever been afraid of anything? It was an unexpected question. It was the most honest thing the young man had said up to that point. And Cash knew it. When the young man asked that question, the air in the room shifted, because this wasn't a challenge anymore. This was a real question, one that came from somewhere inside. Cash looked at the young man before answering, looked for a long time, like he was taking measure of him, looking for where the question had come from. Every night, he said. The young man couldn't understand that at first. Every night before I walk on stage, Cash said. 20 years now. Same feeling every time. But the young man stopped. Who am I? Cash said. His voice wasn't hard, just real. Everybody knows you. Millions of people listen to you. You're Cash. Yes, Cash said. And every night before I walk on stage, I think, do I still deserve this tonight? Is it still going to come out right? The young man went quiet. That fear doesn't go away, Cash said. I don't want it to go away, because that fear takes me seriously. It keeps me honest.
His hands were still resting on the guitar. They didn't move. You came in here today to kill that fear. By beating me, by proving you're better. He stopped. But that fear isn't your enemy. It's your best teacher. And you haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. The young man didn't say anything for a long time. He looked at his guitar, at the case in his hands, at his fingers, then looked at Cash. So what am I supposed to do? He said. Cash laughed. He rarely laughed. He laughed this time, a small, real laugh. Go play, he said. Play everywhere, on small stages, on big ones. Play when nobody's watching. Play when they are. He paused. You're going to have bad nights, real bad. Nights where you walk on stage and nothing works. Nights where every note feels wrong and every word feels hollow. Those nights are going to make you. Those nights are what will give everything you play its meaning. The young man raised his head. Now go, Cash said. I've got a show. But the young man didn't get up right away. There was one more thing. Were you afraid before going on stage tonight? Cash's face didn't change, but something passed through his eyes. It's still going, he said. The young man stood up, shouldered his guitar, walked toward the door. With every step he carried something. He didn't realize he was carrying it. He stopped at the threshold, turned around. Why did you tell me all this? He said. You could have thrown me out. Cash picked up his cup. The coffee had gone cold. Because you walked in, he said, and people who walk in are looking for something. I didn't know what I was looking for. I know, Cash said, but you were still looking. That's enough. The young man wanted to say something more. His mouth opened, then closed. He gave a slight nod of his head. It wasn't thanks. It wasn't quite a farewell either. It was something else, something with no name. The door closed. The room went quiet again. Cash set his guitar in the corner, looked at his papers, finished his coffee. 2 hours until showtime. Thousands of people were waiting. And before he walked on stage, the same thing always came. That fear, that old familiar fear. Feeling it, that was the sign that everything was still right. The people who had seen what happened in that dressing room told different stories later. One said the young man had cried. Another said no, he hadn't. He just walked out very quietly. A third said he hesitated when closing the door, like he wanted to say something but didn't. They all agreed on one thing. That young man did not walk out the same as he walked in. Johnny Cash took the stage that night. He stayed up there for 2 hours. He sang his songs. The crowd stood and cheered. Those were the known things. But what happened in the dressing room was never known. Years later, a member of Nashville's old production crew told that story in an interview. A journalist had asked, "What kind of man was Cash?" The man thought for a moment. "I saw a night when a young kid challenged him," he said. Cash didn't prove a thing, but that kid walked out of that room a different person. The journalist asked, "What did Cash do?" The man smiled. "He played guitar." Most of the stories told about Johnny Cash are about big stages, prisons, live broadcasts, fights with record labels, standing up to institutions. But it wasn't those big moments that made Cash who he was. Great men are great in the small moments too. That night in Nashville, in that dressing room, Cash had options. He could have called security. He could have pointed to the door. He could have ignored the young man entirely. Nobody would have blamed him. But he didn't do any of those things. He just sat. He listened. He picked up a guitar. Because Cash understood this, it's easy to make a young man feel small, but to build up the fire already burning inside him, that's something else entirely. And Cash always chose that something else. What became of the young man after that night? Nobody knows for certain. In Nashville's production world back then, hundreds of names came and went. Some made it, some didn't. Some found big stages, some stayed in small towns. But 10 years after that night, there was a concert in a small town in Tennessee. A middle-aged guitarist took the stage. His voice was worn. His hands were marked. The songs he played weren't complicated. But underneath every note there was something with no name. Something you recognized when you felt it. When the show was over, a friend asked, "Why don't you ever talk on stage?" The man was quiet for a moment. "I learned it from somebody once," he said. "He told me the real things worth saying come out of the guitar." The friend asked, "Who taught you that?" The man smiled. "Somebody," he said. "A long time ago." Johnny Cash passed away in 2003. But what he left behind didn't end. What he left wasn't only songs, not just records and concerts and recordings. What he left was smaller and bigger at the same time. In dressing rooms, on small stages, in rehearsal halls, across hundreds of quiet moments, he gave people something. Sometimes a sentence, sometimes just silence. Sometimes he just picked up a guitar and played, and those people carried that something. Young men carried it as they grew old, sometimes by telling it, sometimes without telling it, but they carried it. What happened in that Nashville dressing room was simple. A young man had opened a door without knocking. Johnny Cash had listened, picked up a guitar and played. Both of them had left that room, one to a concert, one to the streets. But both of them were different now. That was Cash's greatness. When he took the stage, millions were watching. But he was the same man when nobody was watching. When a door opened, when the silence settled, and when a young man said, "I'm better than you," Cash would pick up a guitar and play, without words, without argument, saying everything that could be said with a single note. Some people come into this world and leave. Some leave a mark. Johnny Cash was both. The mark he left that night in Nashville was small. One dressing room, one young man, one guitar.
guitar. It never made the history books, but something changed inside that young man, and that changed thing walked with him. It walked with the music he played. It walked with the people he taught. That's how some things spread, without sound, without a record, just from one man to another, in dressing rooms, on small stages, and sometimes, when a door opens without a knock. Johnny Cash didn't have to prove anything, but that night he picked up a guitar, because that's who Cash was. When the stage lights went dark, when the cameras turned off, when nobody was looking, he was still the same man, and there was a word for that: character.